Welcome to Religious Rejects. I'm Alicia, she, her.
And I'm Christine.
And today we're super excited because we have a special guest. We're doing our first remote interview with Jakob Hero-Shaw. Jakob is a colleague of mine from Metropolitan Community Churches and has been serving an MCC church in Florida for many years, and is currently going back to school for some more education. And so today we're going to be tackling the topic of being transgender in the church today. And there's so many questions that people have to grapple with for those who are transgender, who are coming to terms with their transgender identity, or perhaps non-binary, gender non-conforming. There's kind of a whole range of gender identities and ways people can understand and how they claim their identities. And so I really wanted to have an opportunity to really dive deeper into some of these issues, because we are in the midst of a lot of national, local, state level rejections of transgender people. Kansas has just passed a terrible new law requiring trans people, their gender marker on their driver's license has to be what the gender they were assigned at birth, which is a horribly violent act to be perpetrating on the trans community in Kansas. So we are understanding and naming that context of where we are today. Also, there are many wonderful things to talk about and not just trauma. So we're going to try and cover all of it today. So Jakob, did you grow up in a spiritual tradition, and what sort of spiritual influences did you have when you were growing up?
When we went to church, it was the Unitarian Universalist Church.
Okay.
Which is it's a very progressive, non-dogmatic kind of church. Ultimately, it wasn't where I stayed. I ended up getting much more interested in Christian traditions, and the Unitarian Church is tangentially Christian, but not really focused on the Jesus thing. My mother grew up Catholic, and her whole side of the family is Catholic, and I definitely have a lot of influence from the spirituality aspect of Catholicism without all the stuff that is problematic to me. So my good friend Jim Matulski says that there are Roman Catholics, but that I am a romanticized Catholic.
I like that.
I love that. I've never heard that. That's great.
What were some of the biggest spiritual influences in your life as you grew up? What do you remember about God?
Oh, I remember being very young and being very curious about God. And I remember somehow along the way learning that God can do anything. So for context, I was assigned female at birth, and growing up I would lay in bed and at night, I was probably like 6-ish, and would pray, and I would try to convince God that if God let me wake up as a boy, that God could also like erase everyone's memory, and then there wouldn't be a question, right? Well, thank you, dumb boy. So I used to pray all the time that I could wake up as a boy. And then later on in my life, I started waking up as a boy every day. I still do.
Oh,
Wow.
that is beautiful.
Yeah.
So how did that start? So you were starting to feel things obviously at 6. How did that progress then as your life continued? When did you make the decision?
I really didn't know. This was obviously grew up before social media and stuff. I didn't know that this was like how I was feeling, that there were other people who existed in the world like me. And then I kind of heard of some people who transitioned, and I was probably, I don't know, I would say a preteen age, and was totally blown away by the concept.
Mm.
Um, so, I wasn't, it took me a while to get the courage to come out. I would say it's interesting because I nowadays people kind of label the start of transitioning when they first started talking about it. Whereas years ago, it used to be that we labeled when we started transitioning as whenever we started having medical interventions. So for a long time, I would say, oh, I transitioned at 23. But the reality is that I came out as trans and started talking about it and processing with a therapist and with some close friends as a teenager. So now, now I'm 46 and I've lived more of my life after coming out as trans as I did leading up to coming out as trans.
Mm.
Um, which, sometimes this might sound strange, but like I legitimately just forget about it, you know?
How did coming out as transgender change your relationships with yourself, your family, your friends, your community, life at school, that kind of stuff? What was that like?
Or
At
the
the t-
Catholic side.
Oh,
I'm curious. I love some drama.
In some ways, the process moved pretty slowly. So, like, as I started kind of socially transitioning and then started medically transitioning, I mean, to me, especially in my early 20s, it time just felt like it moved so slowly. But I also
mm,
think that helped people in my life adjust to the concept. Like I know for my grandparents, I think things were so much easier because we would go places and people, before I transitioned, people couldn't necessarily figure out, like I remember my grandmother would get embarrassed because people would say, "Oh, is this your grandson?" This is when I was a teenager, and she would say, "Oh, this is my granddaughter," and then as soon as people stopped asking that, and they would just say, "This is my grandson," and she could just say, "Yes, this is my grandson." Um, then it was just easy. And it was actually like surprisingly easy with my extended family. I mean, there are definitely like some family members who stopped speaking to me, but I sort of have this belief that people get to choose who's in their life. And if they choose not to have me in their life, then that's a bummer, but truly not that much of a loss. For me. I know for other people that's not how it is. I'm just saying in my context, the people who shut me out were not the people who I chose to have in my life anyway.
yeah, yeah.
Um, but because I've been so lucky, I mean, it helps that my parents are just absolutely wonderful, and
Mm,
my brother, and like I've had it relatively easy around the whole coming out thing.
mm,
Um, and now, decades later, I live my life completely unquestioned in my gender. People have no idea that I'm trans unless I tell them. And in my day-to-day interactions with people, I don't, I mean, I don't hide it, but like, unless someone has Googled me, like the people at the gym and the other people I just interact with in it day to day, um, I assume that they just have no idea.
yeah, yeah.
I mean,
I'm
to
just,
me, my identity, it, for me, my sexual orientation is a bigger part of my identity than my transness. Only because I don't have to confront my transness all the time. But
mm,
Mm.
but I'm gay, I'm married to a man, and that is the thing that, at least here in Florida, um, I think is what puts me in a day-to-day interaction kind of way in more danger. Now, when we talk
Mm.
about the other realities of like getting medical care in Florida, or uh, if I go to a protest and get arrested or something like that, then my transness suddenly becomes a much bigger issue.
Mm.
But like yesterday, I went out to lunch with my husband, and like just at some average restaurant here in Tampa, and there was no problems, but at the same time, there's always that little bit of uh, care that we have to take being here in Florida. You know, we often are affectionate and have to look around and make sure, you know, is this a safe place to be? So in that way, I feel like the transness for me is not as much of an issue. Now, if I didn't have the privilege that I have, which is that I can live unquestioned as the man that I am, well, that would be a different story.
yeah. So can you give us a an understanding of, what is the difference between gender identity and sexual orientation, just so that we can help for those who haven't really thought about that? What is the difference with that?
So this is definitely a question that I get asked quite a lot.
Okay.
And uh, I'll give you a little history about it, which
Please.
is kind of interesting because in order to transition in the US and in lots of other countries, there are these standards of care, which now are called WPATH, but they used to call the Harry Benjamin Standards of Care. And in a
Oh,
Mm.
very early version of these standards of care that doctors and therapists would use, a person would have to have been heterosexual post transition, meaning that
oh, really?
me having transitioned to male, that I would have to be with women.
Mm.
And what's really strange to me is that that's one of the reasons why, when I was trying to get through, it took me 4 years of trying to be able to start hormones. And one of the reasons was, even though at that point in my life I'd never actually dated a man, I wasn't willing to say that I would be straight post
Mm.
transition. Now, the standards had already been updated by that point, but clinicians still had this bias toward heterosexuality post transition.
Wow.
Mm.
And I was also told that I wasn't manly enough, which now I just think is so funny because, like, yeah, I'm lots of things, but I am not manly. I mean, I've got a beard and I'm bald. I'm male, but I'm not manly. There's a difference.
That is
Uh,
so wild.
huh.
Yeah, especially when it was like non-trans people who were in charge of trans lives in such a all-encompassing way. There were just a lot of early errors, I think. So basically, gender identity is who you are, how you interact with your own gender. And for most people, their gender aligns with their sex. Now, we know that gender is a social construct for the most part. So a lot of how we interact with our genders are, socially relevant. So the way that someone is masculine or feminine in this country is different than in a totally different cultural context. But for the most part, people's gender identity in the majority of the population matches what they're assigned at birth. And then for other people, they might not align with any particular gender. They might be non binary. They might be gender queer. They might sometimes be identifying with one gender or another or yet another. And then there's people like me, like I'm pretty relatively gender normative. I'm what they would say like a binary trans guy. Um, uh, so those are all just to do with the gender piece. Sexuality is a whole other thing. Uh, Sexual orientation is who you're attracted to. And I definitely get asked a lot, like, wait, so like why, if you wanted to be with a man, why did you transition? Why not just be
Mm,
a woman with a man? And there is no way I ever could have been with a man if I didn't transition.
mm.
Uh-huh.
The dynamics of that, the idea of being the female part of a heterosexual relationship, like that has never appealed to me. And um, my husband is not trans, um, and he really hadn't. He was a bit sheltered. He's from a small town in Scotland, uh,
Love
and
that.
and he really hadn't even like heard. He knew about trans people like in theory, and he had just never really met a trans guy or really given it much thought. But he saw me on a sleazy app. Describe
Ah!
it as an app that is not meant for finding your lifelong partner.
Yeah.
And he thought I was cute, so he messaged me, and yeah.
Mm.
And eventually we got married. I adopted the kids that he had prior to our
Mhm.
relationship, and
Oh,
we're just this happy little family unit.
I love
That's
that.
amazing. I love it.
People sometimes ask, like, why his name's Alan? Why would Alan be with someone like Jacob? And he just gets his reaction to that is so funny because he's like, are you kidding? He and I are like ridiculously smitten with each other, um, even after all these years. I
Love
mean,
that.
Alicia, you've seen us together. You've seen the googly eyes we make at each other
Yeah.
13
Yeah.
years in. So, yeah. And sometimes, labels are exhausting.
Yes.
We both, our label is gay or queer, uh, and he's cisgender, which is just a word that means not trans. And I'm trans, but really, the reality is that we're just like two people who love each other.
I'm sure you get sick of having to talk about that. And yet I know it's important because there's a lot of conversation and rhetoric around these things today. And I think it's really important to have a clearer understanding of what we're actually talking about when we're using some of this language, because language matters.
It really does. And
Mm.
I would rather spend the time talking about it and help people understand than have people not know how to discuss it. Because we
Mm,
end up with a young trans person, and I don't just necessarily mean someone whose age is young, but I mean someone maybe young in their journey.
Mm.
And it helps if there's somebody who's been around a while who can say, like,
Mhm.
okay, here's kind of how this works. And, sometimes I wish that I had transitioned and just never told anybody and just like lived my life. But the reality is, I'd rather be able to help people, help people figure it out and find their way and understand.
absolutely. Yeah.
Mhm.
And help us cisgender folks have a clue. So
Mhm.
thank you.
Mhm. Mhm.
Well, thanks for being willing to engage in the conversation.
Can I hear more about the spiritual journey that you took as well? How did you reconcile the gender identity and the Christian beliefs? How did you, and how do you, I don't want to say defend it because I don't think it should be defended, but you know what I mean? How do you explain it to those that feel you are wrong?
So there's multiple pieces to it, of course. First of all, when I was in high school, and life was super complicated because I was a teenager, and everybody's life is complicated when they're a teenager. But I was really trying to figure it out, and I was really thinking that, okay, I believe in God, but I don't know what that means, and I don't know if God could possibly love someone like me.
Mm.
And I was like craving that. I was like craving hearing from someone in a position of authority to just say to me, like, of course God loves you.
Mm.
I had this really good friend who was Christian. She was part of a kind of evangelical church, and she was struggling with her sexual orientation. And so we had these incredible conversations about God and the possibilities of God and
Mm.
sexual identity stuff. And unfortunately, she eventually got the courage to come out to her church, and
Mm.
it was one of these giant churches, and the pastor humiliated her. She was a teenager,
Mm.
Oh,
called her up, called her a sinner in front of the
oh
congregation.
no.
And then for about 2 years, she really struggled with that church, trying to let it still be her church home. And then finally, she just couldn't do it anymore, and she died by suicide.
Mm.
And she was my like one person who I felt I could really explore spirituality with. And I had so many questions. She was the first person to like talk to me about Jesus and the Bible, and then she was just gone.
Mm.
And so tragically, and because of church,
Church.
and it was just awful. And I had never considered ministry before then.
Mm.
And she had wanted to she had wanted to be a pastor. And so then I thought, I don't know, I just started feeling called to ministry,
Mm.
and you know, to being the person that I wished I had
Oh,
in that absolutely horrific time.
Mm.
Um so that's yeah, so that's one piece of it.
Yeah.
It's hard for me to talk about my journey without it being a story of a tragedy of a teenager who killed herself.
oh,
Um, and it completely changed the course of my life. The other piece was that I was super depressed prior to that, and since, it didn't cure anything, but it did refocus me because enduring that and going through it, I realized that what suicide does to the people who love you. And I realized for myself that that would never be an option.
mm.
And and that also changed my life. And there were
Mm.
multiple layers to this
Yeah.
incredible loss, because I realized I needed to get healthy, emotionally
Mm.
healthy. I needed to be comfortable in who I was, and it gave me permission.
Mm.
Um, it's so tragic that that's what did it, but it really mm, gave me the opportunity to, you know, grow in a different kind of way than I ever anticipated.
Yeah.
Mm.
Um, and I also did a lot of spiritual work around, is it okay to change my body?
Mm.
Um, and ultimately realized that I'm called to this. I'm
Mm.
Mm.
called to all of it. Like, I don't think that God made a mistake and I was born wrong.
I've heard that from so many people in the Christian community about trans people.
Right. Like, people say all
Yes.
the time, like, you can't be trans because God doesn't make mistakes. I'm like, you're right, God doesn't make mistakes.
Yeah.
Mm.
Um, I think that I truly believe that I was called to the whole thing. Like
Mm.
Justin Sabia Tanis is UCC clergy. I think he's ordained to UCC. He's a professor at United Theological Seminary of the Twin Cities, and he used to be an MCC pastor. And a long time ago, around the same time that I started medically transitioning, he had a book that came out uh, that talked about gender as a calling, and I was,
Mm,
Oh,
oh wow, this is
oh,
my calling,
mm,
and I'm not fixing anything. I'm not broken, so there's nothing to fix.
yeah.
And if I had it all to do over again, I would do it the same. If I could go back to 1979 and assigned male at birth, uh, I wouldn't. I would do it the same.
Wow. Wow.
I just want to pause for a moment and say, if anyone is struggling with ideas of self-harm, please reach out for help. We have a previous episode about a suicide that happened in our community, and a family member spoke. So please reach out for help. And yeah, that really hit me hard there, Jacob. So thank you for sharing that. And do you mind sharing your friend's first name?
Her name was Suhaze.
Okay.
Shaez. Suhaze.
Okay. Thank you. I just want to honor her as a dear friend and a light in your life. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So then, what was your journey then to becoming a pastor? Because it's one thing to go from, coming from a Unitarian Universalist background and going through all of this, and then it's another whole thing, and then to claim more specifically a Christian spiritual identity, and then it's a whole other level to actually discern that calling to become a pastor. So tell us more about that journey.
Yeah. Um, I will tell you that for my parents, of all the various ways that I have surprised them, me announcing that I was going to become an ordained minister was absolutely the one that surprised them the most.
That's great.
Fundamentally, I like to help people, and I felt like this was a way to help people by gaining the knowledge I needed to really be able to provide people with care. And I've transitioned recently out of pastoral ministry. So I'm not serving a church, but I still am very much connected to spirituality as another piece of my calling. Um, so it at first it kind of started with me just taking some religious studies classes in my undergrad program, and then that became my major. And then I started looking at seminaries and um, did a lot of research about where to go. And, um, every step of the way, it just felt like I was on the right path. I love the history of the metropolitan community churches. I love how our history is so enmeshed with LGBT history, even though it's mostly enmeshed with just gay and lesbian history. But
Yes.
still, uh, it's a human rights church, and I don't know. As I got more and more involved in the church, I just thought, how can I really serve?
What has your experience been like in an LGBTQ plus affirming, and metropolitan community churches has a long history of especially being part of the gay liberation movement and all of that. What has your experience been as a trans person within some of these LGBTQ plus affirming places? What has there been a tension there? Has it been less welcoming to you as a trans person than as a gay man? I mean, What are the complicated dynamics with that? If
That's
there are any complicated dynamics.
Oh, yes, if there are. So that is complicated. And you know what's interesting is that I've found that in predominantly straight spaces, it's almost like queer is queer, right? Like
Mm,
the difference between a trans person who's maybe a straight trans person and a trans person who's a gay person isn't gonna matter as much. But in predominantly cisgender lesbian and gay spaces, it does matter.
mm,
So here's an interesting thing. Um, I'll start with a caveat that I loved pastoring. I feel called away from it now, but and I love my people in my church. And at the same time, there were some real struggles around transphobia.
mm,
I was careful how I spoke about it at all times, even just on my own social media. Very careful to frame things up if I talked about trans issues to be about trans people and not about me. And yet the feedback I got consistently was anytime I mentioned trans stuff, even if it was in like a litany with other issues, people would focus in on the trans thing and again see it as me just making it all about myself.
mm,
It's really hard. And the main, like, for example, Trans Day of Remembrance. So Trans Day of Remembrance is every year. It's an international day of recognition for people who've been murdered from transphobic violence. And every year we would honor it in service, and every year I would get negative feedback afterwards about making the church about this one issue. And I had a few trusted people in the church who I'd said, I need you to keep track of how often I talk about trans issues because I wanted to make sure I wasn't maybe talking about it more than I realized. And, I had quite a few people who attended, like, I had one person who attended every single Sunday and was very involved in the church for 2 years before he even found out that I was trans. And that happens so many times. And yet, on the other side of it is people saying every week he's just up there talking about being trans.
Mm.
And I think that that's how people heard it. I don't think they were lying. I think that they were saying what they heard because they couldn't just look at me and just see a person. They could only see a trans person.
mm.
I found exhausting.
Yes.
And and I and I in retrospect um realized that I could have sought out some more help and resources to help
Mm.
people. I was very focused as a white person on doing anti-racism work in the church, and I felt like I couldn't do, you know, work around transphobia because I was the insider.
Mm.
Yeah.
So, that's hard. It's a hard reality of this community that I really, really loved. And it's not just the church I was serving, it's other churches too. That these progressive Christian spaces are struggling around trans issues and how to be welcoming. And the reality of being welcoming is that inclusion doesn't work if inclusion means you're allowed to show up. Welcome and real inclusion means that a community is willing to change
Mm.
for the people who show up. It's just like churches that say, "Why don't we have any young people?" And then the people come in, and a young person shows up, and they're not greeted,
Mhm.
or they're made to feel like they're not dressed right, or all the music sounds like a dirge, and it's not what they want to hear, right? Like
Right.
it's not like, well, why can't we have young people? It's I hear that in so many churches of all different types of churches, right? That's
Yes.
the same
Yeah.
thing. Like, well, are you willing to change?
Mm.
And it's the same thing around trans stuff. Like, you have
Hmm.
to be willing to fundamentally change the way that people are invited and welcomed.
Mm.
Yeah.
And in some ways, I didn't do my community a service by allowing myself uh, to be swayed by that. I
Mm,
made myself small
Mm.
to make other people comfortable.
mm.
And at the same time, I always feel like I have to give the other side of it, which is that I know that people who I served as their pastor are going to hear this, and I really want people to hear that I loved that church, and I
Mm,
love these people, even the people who hurt my feelings and made me feel they didn't make me feel anything, but whose the interactions with them felt hurtful to my soul. I love them, maybe
yeah.
too much.
Mm,
But
yeah.
yeah, so that's the other piece of it.
Yeah.
Jacob, can I ask if we put the trans issue off the table, what would you be most passionate to discuss?
Right now, I kind of have an interest in progressive churches and the ways that we harm each other in progressive churches.
Oh,
Oh,
we've got to add
I think
that.
that there's a particular kind of harm that is
Mhm.
happening, and it often lands on our clergy.
yes.
So that's the one thing. I'm studying to be a therapist, so
Mm.
mental health stuff in general.
That's fantastic.
Because progressive churches, we have it all figured out and we don't do harm to each other anymore. Yeah.
Oh, it's awful. And I think that in some ways the expectation of martyrdom on behalf of the clergy is
Oh,
there's a real pressure to be martyrs as
Mm.
clergy. It's like it's I think it's the impact of capitalism,
Mm.
like we pay you to do this. We pay you to be Christian for us. Um,
Oh my gosh, yes.
yeah.
Yeah.
So
and in MCC, we pay you to be our official public protester.
Yeah.
that too. And there were times when definitely have felt that I'm expected to put my body on the line, like I go to protests, of course, like any good MCC pastor does, but there have been times that I thought, like there was a big protest down at what they call Alligator Alcatraz,
Yeah.
Oh.
and I ultimately decided not to go because I thought, you know what? Let's let the people who aren't trans be
Yeah.
there.
Mm.
Yep.
I thought if I got arrested, that could be catastrophic for me
Yes.
Mm.
at an anti-ICE protest
In Florida.
in Florida.
Let's be really clear about your context.
Yeah.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
And I do think it's just something we need to examine in the progressive church context. Like whose bodies are we putting on the line?
Yeah, it's true.
And if congregants are saying, well, why aren't you going to this protest that they also aren't going to? That's another thing to
Yeah.
examine.
It's so true. Oh my gosh. Oh
Are
my
you
God.
having a
Be a
moment?
great extra.
I don't think it has to be this way. I think we can heal in our churches, but
Mm.
Yeah, I know.
Isn't that what we're supposed to do?
Yeah, we're supposed to do that, and yet it's not. Yeah, there's a lot of projection that happens of people's trauma and expectations.
Which then I think, leads us into what's happening today. So, what kind of challenges do trans folks face today, and how can how can we be better allies?
that's a great question. Um, so a really wonderful way to be an ally, or some people say an accomplice,
Yes.
Oh, I like
is
that.
um, sometimes when people are in danger or in situations of spiritual and emotional turmoil, they just need someone to be there with them,
Mm.
not offering solutions. Like, let's use this Kansas thing as an example.
Hmm.
I said to my husband over the weekend, if that happens here, we're not staying. We're pretty committed to being in Florida for a few reasons, mostly my parents and other family stuff, but we cannot,
Hmm.
I mean, what happened there isn't just about the license, it's about the no grace period. So immediately, people are facing even potential jail time for using their IDs. That
Yeah.
is that is punitive beyond. Now, the answer to if a person in that situation called you right now and said, "This is the situation," the answer isn't, "Can't you just take a cab to the DMV to get your license?" Right? It's not.
Yeah.
It's not jumping into a solution. It's saying that is horrific. I cannot imagine it, but tell me how you feel. Tell me
Mm.
what's going on in your heart. And just being willing, no matter how uncomfortable it is, to sit in that discomfort. Because
Amen.
it's one thing to be discriminated against, it's one thing to live in fear, it's a whole other thing to do it alone and feel like
Mm.
there aren't people who are willing to just be there. So I think
Mm.
and you don't have to totally understand. Someone might be using terminology you don't understand or have an identity that doesn't make sense to you. Uh, That's okay. Try to understand. But really, I truly believe that just being there, just saying, I see you. If
Mhm.
this is within a religious context or a spiritual context, saying you're a beloved child of God, and
Mm.
no lawmaker can take that away from you. They
That's
think they
right.
can,
Yeah.
but and no pastor can take that away from you. No
Mhm.
one
Yeah.
can take that away.
Amen. That was great.
What special gifts do trans, gender nonconforming, genderqueer, non-binary folks bring to the spaces they show up in? What would you say?
Mm. Well, I'm not allowed to talk about the superpowers because
Oh,
that's
okay. Okay.
a
That
secret that only
okay.
trans people know about.
Superpowers.
Um,
Oh.
like the ability to fly and oh, I'm so
Yeah,
sorry.
yeah. Whoops.
Yeah.
I will say one really one nice thing about I feel really good at helping people in transition.
Mm,
Like I don't mean gender transition. I mean like it is hard for someone to tell me that it is too hard to change their life, right? I'm
Oh,
like, look at me,
yes. Thank you. That's awesome.
you know? You can do it. You can change whatever it is. Leave that bad relationship, leave that bad job, whatever it is.
Wow, that's fantastic.
Move to
Never
another
thought
country
about
if you
that.
need to. Yeah, change. So
yeah.
I think that that's a special gift. I think there is something really beautiful about people who've experienced uh, life in multiple ways.
Mm,
I have been in spaces and I understand both maleness and femaleness
mm,
Mm.
in a way that I don't know that I could had I not lived, even though my experience pre-transition was profoundly uncomfortable. I
mm.
still feel like I have an understanding that I
Mm.
wouldn't have gotten any other way. So, I can't speak for all trans people, but I think
Of
that
course.
that's a special thing that a lot of us share is that understanding. And I think as a white dude, uh, having a real knowledge about sexism in a lived
Mm.
experience kind of way matters.
So, we are a podcast talking about rejection from religious communities and religious folks. And, so much of our work is about what do we keep, rethink, or reject from the tradition, the tradition. And what do we, it's all about we get to decide what's important to us. We get to pick. And as you are reflecting on your journey and the whole mix of the journey, and thinking about healing from the various experiences that you've gone through, some of which might be traumatic, what are some of the things that have been really important to you in that healing journey of really being able to claim your identity as a beloved child of God and as who you are and who God made you to be, not as a mistake, but in your full self and your full understanding of who Jacob is?
You know, one of the things that a real blessing that I got from pastoring a church for 10 years was that it helped me really understand my own theology.
Mm,
I would say, like, if I had to boil it down to one thing only, one concept only, it would be solidarity.
mm,
And that is something that gets skipped over so much in modern ways of the way that I don't even call it, I don't even want to call it theology. It's more like popular theology, like just out like the books that you might see at a, you know, just mainstream Christian section in a bookstore, right? It's
mm-hmm.
all about that becomes all about individual salvation, which is just when you read the scriptures, that's not what it's about.
Right.
But this idea of solidarity, it's everywhere
Mm,
in the Bible. And in the Hebrew text, in the New Testament, it is like such an important message. And I just, you know, when you serve a church for a decade, you preach like 500 times. And I couldn't believe it for years, just again and again, its solidarity kept coming to me. So I would say like there's a lot of dogma that's not helpful. And there's a lot of rules that people make up because they're interpreting texts in their own way. But it just comes back to how can we be there for each other?
mm.
That is, at the end of the day, that is my spiritual tradition, my spiritual path that I am on is being in solidarity.
I love that.
It's beautiful.
Yes. Jacob, thank you so much for coming today and sharing your heart. That was just beautiful. And I love that whole thing on change. I'm going to take that one with me, you know, that what do you mean you can't change? And then just I love that so much. But I also appreciate the solidarity message. I think that is something that is definitely needed today. So thank you. Thank you.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, thanks so much. And hopefully next time we can see you in person.
Yes.
Yes, would love that. Thanks so much, Jacob. And thank you for sharing parts of your story with us and your lived experience and the insights that you have. And many blessings to you as you continue on your path and whatever it is that you're called to next.